All right. Thanks for tuning in to All Things Division III Soccer with SimpleCoach and Jackie. If you can't tell, that there is Jackie. She's supposed to be having my six, but I think she's deep REM sleep. And I'm SimpleCoach. Today, on this episode of SimpleCoach, I get to speak with head coach Mike Singleton of Washington and Lee University, Final Four program in 2021. And, we get to cover, their season, some of the outstanding players that they have on their roster, prospects for the future, and some of the challenges that he experienced in the spring, in the COVID spring, and leading up to their best run yet in program history of eventually losing to Connecticut College in the semifinals, and how close they think or thought they were. Or think they are to getting the ultimate goal, which would be a national championship. So, great time, really enjoyed it. Hope you do enjoy it as much as I had having the conversation. And so here it is, Coach Mike Singleton of Washington Lee University. Out. Coach Singleton, thanks for joining me today on this Simple Coach to Coach interview. Really do appreciate you taking the time out of your probably hectic schedule with all the recruiting you're probably going through to join me and talk to me. I'm always grateful that coaches are so willing of their time these days. So thanks for joining, and hope you enjoyed as much as I do.
Well, thanks for having me.
I'm actually a closet fan of Washington and Lee. I've actually ordered a hat. Unfortunately, it didn't get here in time, and just because I was really impressed in the manner in which you played and throughout the season. But before we get to talking to the season part, maybe you could just talk about your coaching journey, how you ended up at Washington and Lee, and any key influences that you had along the way. Would be, let's start there.
I just look like I probably have one of the most sort of eclectic journeys there is, because I've really coached at all levels. Everything from teaching people how to work with 4-year-olds on the soccer field, to then doing a youth national camp a day later, to then coming back and working with children with ADHD or Down syndrome, to then going and working with a college team. And I actually think that varied background, where I've been able to work at all levels of soccer in this country, have really helped me, because it's kind of brought back lessons that are consistent regardless of who you're coaching, and also made it so seeing the differences between levels has made me think a great deal about what's best at each level, because when days are so different, weeks are so different from each other, as you're a developing coach, you start to really understand the differences that you're facing. Mentors of mine over the years, I would say Lou Atkinson, who was the director of coaching in Delaware for decades. He's always been a great person. I still use him as a mentor and as a friend. He's someone I talk to regularly. Ian Mulliner and I have a great collegial relationship. When I was in Illinois, he was the state director there. Excuse me. And then I actually hired him in Massachusetts when I was the executive director of the state to be my technical director. So we always have great soccer talk. And I just love bouncing things off those two guys' minds, because first off, I know they're always for the players first, and they're always going to take it from what's best for the people first. And they also have a wide variety of experience, and it's fun to talk to them because they're funny. So that's always great too.
That's always helpful, right? Get a chuckle out of it. Hey, I actually, because of the conversation I had yesterday with Dan Wagner at Franklin and Marshall, it dawned on me that I never really thought about it much. And so I just add it to something I ask. You know, that COVID year, that blank year, 2020, I never really put much thought into it, largely because, my regular job, I work from home. And so I'd been in here for 5 years. I'd been working from home. So it wasn't, I don't want to say it wasn't a big deal. It was obviously a big deal, but I was at where I was supposed to be at anyhow. So it didn't really, and I think my thought was, hey, I would have, not a big deal, not a big deal. But, I realized yesterday, it probably had a big impact on you, your team, your program, your players. Could you just sort of go into that a little bit? If, maybe it didn't, which would be great. But I know everyone sort of was dealing with all this unknowns and whatnot.
Right. No, I mean, it changed everything we do here. You look at from a normal fall season to us not being able to practice to then us being able to practice in masks while 6 feet away from each other with no contact. I'd call that modern dance with a soccer ball for weeks, which was very challenging as a coach to try to come up with activities to script modern dance with a soccer ball. And then, we did have in our conference in the spring of 2021, we had a conference schedule. So we were able to play a handful of games. But to be honest, that was the oddest. I don't even call it a season because a season has a preseason. A season has a consistent roster. I had 3 weeks during that time period where I only had 9 players at training because of all the close contacts. Mm-hmm. And it was multiple games got canceled or moved, so we never really got to be a team. And that's the thing. Back in the fall, my freshmen who were freshmen during the COVID fall, they didn't feel like they knew the other players on the team because they weren't allowed to even socialize on campus. They weren't allowed to eat together. They weren't allowed to take off their masks ever. And so that was a big thing. In the spring, we tried to just sort of plant the seeds for socialization with whatever conditions we had going through the season or through the semester. But what I think it did, as much as it was uncomfortable for everybody, I'm a silver lining type person and optimistic person. And we had talks as a team and I said, guys, look at it. I'm like, a lot of you just had a year and a half off of competitive soccer for the first time in your life. I mean, these guys, when they grow up playing in club and high school, they're playing 2-3 games a week. They don't take any weeks off. They're going constantly. So at this time, now they had to figure out what they wanted from it because 1, their fitness took a hit, but 2, their technical touch took a hit, their tactical awareness took a hit, their speed of decision making took a hit, and their bodies are now 19, 20, 21, which is very different than 15, 16. Yeah. As we all likely remember, when we're 15, 16, we can recover from anything in a minute. Not so much when you're 20, 21. You don't recover that, and I'm sure you know, like I do now, it takes about 6 months to recover from anything. So, yeah. But that was a big difference for the guys. So we talked about the privilege of playing soccer, that it was something they had always taken for granted, and now they had the opportunity to play. And it's a dwindling opportunity as you go through your college years. So if you value it, make the most of it. If you value it, you got to seize the moment you have, because the way COVID has been so unpredictable, we just had to make the most of every game we had, not knowing what it was going to be in a month or the next month or the next month. So the talks we had were very much, it's got to be now, and you got to do everything you can now. So if we get a real season in fall 2021, we need to be ready to sort of, grab it by the horns and do the best we can. And I think the guys did that very well. They came into preseason best fitness level since I've been here. So I would say in 7.5 years, they haven't been as fit as that. And so many guys had played over the summer because they realized how they missed it when we had that odd season in the spring. And so they came in really ready and committed. And one of the things I I raise as a banner right now, which is kind of odd because if you think back 3 years ago, you never thought you would say something like this. But during the fall 2021 season, we did not have one player miss a practice or a game due to COVID or close contact, anything. And I think we're the only team at the university who can say that. And it speaks to just the commitment the guys showed and the fact that they had to think of it every day and be smart and make sure they didn't put themselves in that scenario. So I'm really proud of the guys for that. And I think they got the message and they learned their lessons. And I think that enabled us to have a really great season last fall.
So it's interesting. Are you getting an echo on your side, or is that just me?
I'm not.
Yeah, we're good. That's interesting. I just, again, sort of helps me think of this thing. I completely blurred out the fact that even in the fall, there was COVID, and that you all, coaches, yourself included, really were on a day-by-day basis to see, right? Like, you could have been, you know, you could have had a week that would have been wiped out because your entire team has to quarantine or something like that. And I think it was Connecticut that started the season. They started preseason, and then they had a week where they couldn't train because of a COVID outbreak or something.
We had 2 games canceled because of other teams having an outbreak.
Yeah. So I forget again. Sort of I just sort of forget. It just blurred. I didn't even think that would have it was there, but indeed it was, right? And under normal circumstances, you did the spring of 2021, you managed. Under normal circumstances, how much emphasis or importance do you put in your spring season? I have this, and I don't know if it's true, and this is part why I'm doing all of this, is just to understand more. I have this notion that programs that are good, they use spring more so than probably other programs to could be tactics, could be what have you. But so I'm curious, what does your spring look like, and how do you use it to have a better fall, which ultimately, right, that's the objective, is how do you bring this all together throughout a year into the fall season?
When we talk about sort of looking at the spring season with our players and understanding of, for us to continue to improve as a team, we need every season for every individual to continue to improve. So if a player does a great job of getting better in the fall season, and then they just don't do the work and they're in sprint season and they've dropped down a few levels, and then we raise them over the course of the spring season to the same level like finishes the fall, we're just treading water, and we're not going to be the best team we can be. So we talk with all the players all the time about, you need to be a better player the first day of spring season than you were the last day of fall. We do a fitness test the first day of spring, just like we do the first day of preseason in the fall. And we treat it very seriously with a little bit of a different focus. So because we can only have one date of competition in our spring season, the focus isn't on results. It's extremely focused on development. And there's 2 ways that we do that. One is, for every player, they have foci that they need to be working on, and it's a shared Google Doc that everybody sees. So if your teammate has a couple things that he's working on, our teammates are told that they need to be responsible for helping each other as well improve in those ways. But during the spring season, we grade every player every day. So they come over to us after a practice, they tell us on a ranking from 1 to 10 what they would give themselves for that practice and why, and then we tell them what we had given them and why. And we track that as well. So we get a lot of individual attention every single day and keeping people focused on what their abilities are. Where that comes in the extremely helpful to us is it standardizes our measurement level. And you think of college players as they come into college, they've had 6, 8, 10 coaches who have told them that they need to do X, Y, or Z in regards to what makes them a good player. And we only have 3 years to get them on the same page with what we think makes a good player and what our program needs. So I've had players who will come in and say, oh, I think I was an 8 today. And would talk about it. And then I'll be like, well, I really thought you were a 3. And if we're that far apart, something's wrong. We're not talking the same language. And vice versa. If he's giving himself a 3 and I'm saying he's an 8, we got to look at that too. So it really helps us as through the spring, we see those numbers come very much together. And it's not that they know what number we're going to give them, because we always ask them to grade themselves first, but they start to hone in on the most important things for them to do as a player. And that's very helpful for us to make sure we're getting the historic noise out of their head and they can focus on the task at hand for the college team. Then overarchingly, we look at 1 or 2 tactical topics that we're going to focus on as a team. And it's usually 1 or 2 overall that we can put into place for the fall. So like this spring, for instance, we're graduating our 2 center backs and our starting keeper. So I look at that sort of defensive triangle right there, and those are 3 very impactful players for our team. So our spring season tactically is going to be focused on the workings of our defensive back 5.
Mm-hmm.
And it might not just be those 3 positions, but how we move players into certain positions. It might sort of change the outside back positions as well. So we've had those 3 guys starting for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a big challenge for us to say, okay, we have different abilities in each of you. Jack Rollins for us is a player who had great speed and who would cover every defender on the field.
Yeah.
So
fantastic ball player, by the way. Fantastic ball player.
He's a great person, great player, and we don't have a player who has his speed and his covering awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been talking with the players about how it needs to be the 4 of you covering for each other, and the organization being even tighter than it was because we don't have the individual exceptionalists to cover it.
Yeah.
So that's the focus for this spring, is saying, okay, how are we going to make sure we're a tighter unit? Because covering is now a team task, not an individual task. And that's a awesome way that I think spring gives us the opportunity to do something that I think is critical for our success next fall.
Mm-hmm. Let me just ask on a side note, because this is you just watching you play, and then sort of what you're talking, you do place a heavy emphasis on tactics and how your team works tactically on the field. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I like it because I like I said, times I've watched you, I was really impressed in that it was there was purpose to what you did, and there was a concerted effort to execute, and that you could see guys making runs that clearly they weren't making runs randomly. Like you knew that I see the ball over and on the wing on here, I'm going to see if I can't sneak in the back door, or I'm going to make a run straight to the ball. So yeah, that's the first thing I noticed about your team. So among other things, like I said, Jack Rollins, I'm a huge fan. Like I was so impressed with him as a ball player, and among others. And we'll talk about those. So let's switch to the season, if that's okay. You know what? You had the void of COVID year and dealing with it that way. What were your early expectations going into the fall, right? And I ask all the coaches this because it in a lot of ways, I just think it's unique because there was no continuity between fall to fall or your regular cadence of what you're doing. So I'm curious, what was your thinking going into the fall based on who you knew was coming back and sort of how you had managed at that point?
Well, it's kind of interesting, and one of the things is going into what would have been the 2020 fall season. I had told the guys, it was the first time I thought we had enough talent to compete for a national title seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And then we didn't have a season. So when we were getting into
Kiss of
20,
death, man. That's like the Sports Illustrated cover. You know,
yeah,
like
exactly.
curse. Like,
So then when we get into 2021, the guys started owning that discussion. And in 2019, we lost in overtime to Tufts in the Sweet 16. And it was interesting to talk to some of my sophomores because in that game, it was a very good game, a very fun game to be a part of. But they realized they gave away an opportunity. And it was actually Seth Chapman and Jack Rollins who said to me, yeah, we understand now that we do belong there. And that game almost gave them the self-confidence and belief that, you know what? Yeah, we should be competing for the national title as opposed to just looking at the Sweet 16. And so I think that marinated with them for a while. And we have a beginning of preseason talk with the players where they set their goals for the season. And we show them their historical goals so they have a framework for it. And the conversation the team had was, well, we should make sure we get to at least the Elite Eight. And then some people were kind of upset by that. And there was pretty loud discussion back and forth on, no, we want to fight for the title. We want to be in that consideration. We just don't want to take one step better. We've been waiting for this. And it was actually probably a 20-minute back and forth with quite a bit of emotion. And to be honest, I didn't say a thing. I just loved watching it because it really was them trying to figure out what they wanted and who they wanted to be as a team. And when I heard that conversation, I knew they had been doing a lot of thinking and a lot of talking. And it was the upperclassmen who were kind of being, a couple in particular, being more forceful with the, no, we need to do better than what our expectation has been. And I think that's the time when I realized, because I knew physically and technically and tactically we could match up, but it had to be that mental side. It had to be that belief in them that they belonged and that they wanted it, and that they knew they could do it. And I think that was the first time they really exhibited that.
I mentioned to somebody before that I was speaking with that there is a little bit of, you need to sort of hit a ceiling a couple times and then to be able to break through, because you don't have that mental, I don't know if it's confidence or an understanding. If you're new to the dance, it's you're not sure, like you said, if you're worthy. And then if you get into the right game, win or lose, and in your case, losing to Tufts, it's like the eye opener. Like, yeah, we're not outsiders to this. We have just as much right to be here as these other teams. And that's a big mental threshold, I think, that a lot of teams go through or have to experience before they can move forward and go for higher. Right? I think that's
I agree.
And then in the fall, you had an incredible roster of players that for the fall. Were there any pieces of the puzzle that you were worried about? Like, I always just reference, scoring, which I don't think you had a problem scoring this year, but I think you had 70 goals. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty remarkable in of its own right. I was trying to look for like close games, and you really, I mean, the close games you tied, right? But anyhow. Yeah, so was there anything that you weren't sure of, you weren't so confident about going into the fall? Like, I think we can get far, but we have this hole that we have to figure out. Otherwise, we're not going to get there.
Well, I knew coming into this season, I knew defensively we'd be sound because we returned very experienced quality players. Going forward was interesting because we needed a forward who was going to score goals. That was one of the missing components of our previous teams, is that we scored a lot of goals, but not from the forward position.
Mm-hmm.
And Adrian Zimmerman, his freshman year was a COVID year. So he didn't really get to experience college soccer, and he was out for most of the spring season whether he had COVID or was a close contact of people. So he never really got to really experience what college soccer was like. So getting him to be firing and being the player that I knew he could be was very important for us. But then also keeping people healthy. And that's a big part of it too, with the college season being so short with so many games in such a short time period. We have to be able to rest the horses and to give people breaks and not to drop levels when we do. And that's one of the things. If we look back to 2019, Michael Kutanzera had been out for 2/3 of the season because he had a stress fracture in his tibia, and he's a pretty good player. and
one of my favorites on your team, but
yeah, and, his not being in that game in 2019, the guys knew they missed him because he would have had an awesome game. That's his style. So wanting to make sure that he was healthy this entire season was a big part of it. And that's where we're a little bit, I would say, more, if you want to call it lax or sensitive. I rest players a lot. So it's if people have played over 70 minutes, they're not playing the next day in practice ever. They will definitely be resting. And if we've had a 2-game weekend, not only will they get their day off as a team afterwards, but then those players who played a lot of minutes will get that second day off as well. And I've been really happy. This year we didn't have any created muscle injuries all year. And the same was in 2019. We didn't create any muscular injuries or missed games. We had some maintenance from guys who came in with a hamstring tightness or something like that. But otherwise, we didn't give away minutes to quality players because we were taxing them too much through an already overly scheduled season.
Yeah. I mean, is that a testament to the depth of your roster too, that you're able to do that? If you're rotating guys and resting guys?
Definitely. And if you look at it, there's John Peterson, who I moved into a central role this year after playing out on the flank in his previous seasons. He was our leading scorer in September, and he was coming off the bench. But he was a critical factor for us, particularly in September when he was being so effective in leading our offense. And that's where, Tyler Smith and Grant McCarty, I often sort of change up their roles together depending on who we're playing and what we need. So there's been I would say an increased movement to understanding that it's not a starting 11, that we have to be able to mix and match depending on the situation and the load, and make sure that we can still be extremely successful. And I think that's what I knew going into last year and going into this past year, is why I said I think we had the teams that could compete nationally, is because we had the best depth. If we went to our 20th player, there wasn't a drop off. And I think that's necessary, particularly the way the D3 tournament's set up, where you're playing 2 games every weekend.
Crazily. I will refrain from comment on on that setup alone. Like, come on. You can't even give it day, but whatever. Before I go down a rabbit hole on the whole tournament thing. Yeah, I was gonna say something about the roster, but that's okay. I'm sure I'll remember at some point and bring it up when it's not germane to what we're talking about. But yeah, I've asked this as well, especially to the teams that achieved. And look, you rarefied air as far as I'm concerned, right? You're top 4 in the country. I mean, Final 4. I mean, you were basically an OT goal away from getting there, right? And so, but there's always that moment in a season, I think, with coaches where you either play a team or there's an experience where it really clicks and you say to yourself, this team has legs to go far. Did you ever experience something like that during the regular season, that you thought, oh my gosh, these guys are as special, and I think we can, based on that, I'm pretty confident that we're going to get far?
I think, the first weekend of the season, I wasn't too happy with our play. We went down and played Emory and Oglethorpe, and I thought we did okay, but we weren't really clicking on all cylinders and we weren't really performing. I'll say 2 weeks later, we went and played Hanover College in Indiana, and then down and played Center College. We've been in the Final Four in 2019. And in the first half of that Center game, we finished 5-0, and it should have been 6 or 7-0 if refs hadn't incorrectly called offsides.
Mm-hmm.
And the guys at halftime, it wasn't smiles. They still had a chip on their shoulder. They were angry and wanting to make sure that people knew. And they went back out on the field and just bossed the game. And with the manner in which they executed what we tried to do that game, that's when I knew the ceiling was raising, is that if we could play that well against a historically very strong team, then we had a lot of potential for us. And it was a question of if we could execute. That's what we always talk about is, are we executing the game plan? Reviewing the scouting report, making sure we're executing what we need to do. And I think if we do that, we have a lot of weapons, and it's really hard for teams to match up against us.
That's always the critical part, right? You have to have all these elements sort of come together at once, and then it all comes down to, do you execute, and are they capable of executing, which you obviously were. All right, so you made the Final Four for the first time in program history, and in the last 5 years, you'd gone to the dance, but you only finished as high as the round of 16. When you started the NCAAs this year and you started the tournament, did you sense anything different at that point than you had in previous years? Or was it, let's just do we're going to go, game at a time?
Well, we focused on a game at a time. I think we always have to do that. But a couple things really helped us is essentially the first 4 games we played were on our home field.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because we had such a good regular season that we got rewarded and got to host. And that makes a big difference when you're not traveling and missing classes and worried about that and eating the food that you're used to eating and sleeping in your bed. That was a big factor. And to be honest, it was kind of like a finally, if you will. Like, we've been the top ranked team in our region for multiple years. But our first round games have always been against teams that have 17, 18 wins and are very competitive teams. And when I look at being the top ranked team in our region and having a strong SOS, I've always looked at it going like, why aren't we getting rewarded with a team that might be a less than extremely competitive game?
Yeah.
And so this season in our first round contest, I knew it was going to be a team that we'd be able to manage and that we wouldn't have to tax ourselves greatly the first day going into the second day. So being at home and then the confidence they got from really being able to boss the field, I think those two things really helped us, is because they started to see just the fruits of their labor from the regular season and going undefeated. They kind of realized, wow, this really did help us. And we had talked about that throughout the season, as you have to manage the season to position yourself in the way you want to have a good tournament. It's not random luck that happens. You got to put yourself in these situations so you're more than likely going to have success because you've eased up some of the conditions in which you're going into the tournament.
So you go undefeated in the season, and then which is remarkable, right? Like, again, to do that over, like you said, over a 20, or 19 game, 18 game stretch, injuries, that sort of thing that you deal with and whatnot, but you go undefeated, and then your first loss is to Randolph in OT on a PK. Was there anything about that game that didn't seem right, as or did you think, oh, this should have been a victory, and for whatever reason we just couldn't execute? Or was there something that you just sort of tilted your head and said, man, that's not a good sign? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I give credit to Randolph because they really executed their game plan very well. But I'd been talking with my team for 2 to 3 weeks about us not executing. and we had played some weaker teams through our conference schedule that our guys just took some laxity and weren't doing the things that we needed to do and are the hallmarks of our team. And we talked about that, but because they were still winning and beating teams by a lot of goals or dominating possession, it's kind of tough to convince a 19, 20-year-old that, yeah, you just won by 6 goals, but you really weren't good.
What do you mean, Coach? I got 3.
Yeah, exactly. It's an uphill battle for sure.
Yeah.
So that had been going on for about 3 weeks. We had been talking about that we weren't doing the things that we had been doing sort of in early October and late September that made me think that we were going to have a really great year. And Randolph came in, played a great game, and sure enough, our guys weren't doing the things they needed to do. In retrospect, when I look at it, I mean, it's the best smack in the face you can have when you're going into the tournament. And we had secured, I think, a pretty confident at-large bid. And then one of our parents did a little research, which I thought was really interesting. If you look back in the last 10 years of teams that win it all, 9 have lost in their conference tournament or not qualified for
it. Holy smokes. Yeah.
And here's how to think about it, which is really interesting. The way the schedule is set up with games, you never get a full practice in between September 1st and November 1st. Because if you look at, say you're playing Wednesday, Saturday, you play Wednesday, you can't have a heavy training on Thursday, Fridays before a game. Then you have a rest day Sunday. You can't go full out on Monday. Tuesday's light because you have a game Wednesday. So for 2 months, you're constantly just trying to keep them focused, but you're not developing. And you're not able to push them to play at the speed they need to in the game. So losing that game gave us 2 weeks of practice before the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
And that was huge. Yeah. We actually got to do the stuff we had done in the preseason and focus on who we are as a team and what we do and how we do it. And that was the first time in 2 months we got to have real practices where I could tax them at 100%.
Yeah.
So getting that allowed us to really get ready for the national tournament and that loss forced the guys to realize that, yeah, we haven't been playing well. We really need to fix a bunch of things here.
Yeah.
So the two things together, I think, really were fortunate for us going into the tourney.
What would you have had if you made it to the final? How many days of preparation? Would it have just been a week or 5 days or something like that?
We would have had 5 days before we played Lynchburg in the final, and then 5 days before
the
header weekend.
Yeah.
And it's just, and Lynchburg, we're rivals with them. It's always a very contentious game, a very physical game, and you got to be really focused and prepared for that, as opposed to internally focused.
Well, even if you have the 2 weeks and the first 2 days after that game, after the loss, you're able to rest, recoup, recover. Then on that third day, you could start going, knowing that you're not going to have this banger of a game. It's sort of, I could see, I never even thought about that. That's really
just look at that game that next week. I'd say probably the 2 days before that game, we can't go 100%. We got to go pretty light. So we're probably doing 1 day of practice that's full. As a difference, we got 5 days of practice fully. And then going into the next day, we didn't have to recover from a very physical game. We did a self scrimmage and managed minutes and worked on particular things, and so we were raring to go and fully healthy and really on the same page.
Wow. It's funny. I was saying, I always forget, and beyond the other side of this screen where you sit, like you're managing those days, right? Like, and so 2 weeks is like, holy smokes, this is such an opportunity, like, oh, bummer, but look at this great opportunity we have. Again, watching from afar, it's hard to remember those types of details about, and how meaningful those 2 weeks are, right? I mean, that's basically your preseason all over again. I mean, you could theoretically start that way, as if it were preseason, but
as a coach, you're like a kid in a candy store because you actually get to coach.
yeah. Like, hey, we could try this drill that I've been wanting to. Yeah. Okay. What? All right. In the NCAA's, let's move on to the NCAA's, because you get through Baruch, Covenant, who I thought was a very good Christopher Newport team. I think they were like 24th ranked 24th in the country. And then you go up against a personal favorite of mine, and who I think is the best passing team in the country, or best possession-based positional team, I think, in the country. They're strong, they're technical. What was your preparation like going into that game?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's something where Brad, the Messiah coach, and I, we get along really well, and we have a lot of similarity in our views of the game, so we enjoy playing against each other. But for us, it was really looking at what they had done during the season and what they hadn't experienced during the season. So when we looked at them, they didn't have a bunch of close games and weren't pushed to have to defend all that much, because even the teams they did play, they didn't play very many good attacking teams. And that was something that we knew we were a pretty good attacking team. So when we looked at that matchup, we said, okay, that's what we have to focus on, is we got to pressure their defenders and make them play faster than they wish to, and not let them build out of the back, so they can't have possession as much in the middle of the park or the front third. And I think, the first 15 minutes of the game, they didn't get out of their half. And you could kind of see some of them getting really frustrated and some of our guys going, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
And when Adrian got the goal in the first half, then it sort of was just, it was just two teams out there, no history of anything from either program. It was guys who realized it was going to be a tough fight for both teams for either one to walk out of there with a victory. But it was a great soccer game, and that's what I was happy with it. It was pretty to watch. And you had a lot of players who were stepping up and back and forth, and we would have momentum, then they would take momentum, and then we took momentum back, and then they took momentum. And it was an exciting game to be a part of and watch. And walking away from that game, we know the history of Messiah soccer, and they have a lot of national titles in their program history. It was something, as a coach, I could say felt very good, because we didn't escape with a victory.
Mm-hmm.
We earned the victory. There was no question about that. People couldn't argue that we sneaked one through. It was a quality game, and we walked away with a well-deserved win.
Yeah.
And I think that was really good for the guys and good for the program and how they sort of want to think of themselves going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't, this wasn't like, oh, we were lucky or something like that. You guys definitely, I've said before, I thought that game was, I'll just say again, the way I interpret the game myself, and again, sitting in my office, but I think it was probably one of the best pure soccer games that I had the opportunity to watch, where two quality teams like to own the ball, like to move it around, just went at each other. And there was a little bit of almost like you could see the tactical part of it, you and Messiah trying to figure out, how do we break this down? I think the first 15 minutes, like you said, you could just see them, how do we get out of our own half with the ball? Because I think for the first, you smothered them. So I thought that was really incredible. So,
well, the interesting thing that I'm sure you'll enjoy is September 1st, 2022. Messiah's coming back to our field.
Nice
game for the two teams.
Nice. I might have to make a trip. That would be fun to watch. It really would.
The kicker about the game
Yeah.
Because of the questionable red card that Kutsinzera got in the Final Four, he will be ineligible for the game.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Okay. Is that your first home? That's your home opener, or that's your opener,
Yeah.
season opener?
That's the first day we can have a competition, and so
Yeah.
we decided to play each other.
Yeah.
And it was actually before we had played in the Elite Eight. We had scheduled it for the next season, and then it just turns out that I'm sure they'll be pretty
Amped up.
pretty spirited when they come
Yeah.
down, knowing what happened at the end of last year for them.
Yeah. They're coming after you. I mean, I don't have to tell you that, but they're coming after you. All right, so you get 3 goals, one from Kutsinzera, who's one of the outstanding players. He's one of my top players that I picked, the top 30. And 2 from Adrian Zimmerman. And I say he kind of it seems to me, quietly led the team in goals and points. And it's almost like there was so many outstanding ball players that on your team that I think, I don't know, like I said, maybe it's just because of my perspective that, you know, and not to mention he has 11 goals just in the tournament alone, like, I saw that and I'm like, oh my gosh. And he's a sophomore. And actually you can make the argument that he's a freshman, right? Because this is his first full season. So first of all, obviously how important was he against Messiah and throughout the season? But then, I mean, were you expecting him to kick it into this next level gear as the tournament started? Because I'll tell you, if it comes down to coaching, you did a marvelous job coaching him to peak at the right time. I'm trying to give you credit, right?
It was funny because I know Adrian throughout the regular season was frustrated because he didn't have as many goals as he would like. And I knew he was capable of scoring at a much higher rate than he had during the regular season. But it really was him having to get used to the college style of play, to play quicker, to use 1 and 2 touch finishes, to not try to beat people 1 and 2 times on the dribble, and to not get into the physical tussles that are so common in the college game. And he's a strong-minded individual, and he likes to have fun on the ball. And so he had to learn his lessons. He had to sort of go through the season and see what worked. And then something just clicked at the right time. And maybe it was that 2 weeks of practice where we did 1 touch finishing almost exclusively. But that was when he started 2 things. One was he was shooting a lot more quickly. Mm-hmm. He wasn't trying to dribble by everybody. He was just receiving it. And 2, he was putting himself in good positions near the goal. So if there were a 12 box, say in between the 6 box and the 18 box, if we were to extend the width of the 12 box to the 18, we talk about trying to receive the ball within that frame, because that's where the most goals come from and the highest percentage quality shots will come from. And if you look at his goals in the NCAA tourney, every single one is from that area. And I think there might be one of the 11 that was more than 2 touch. The majority were 1 touch. Yeah. And that's kind of what allowed him. He's extremely technically skilled and very creative, but his ability to shoot with both feet and to turn in either direction and to do so quickly, that's when he was able to use his skill set best. And what I said to the guys is, when you look at, okay, so Adrian now has scored the most goals in a single tournament in college soccer history of all divisions.
Really?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
That's a pretty cool honor to have. But any player who does that wants to break his own record now. So the question is, okay, how can we keep him going, recognizing that scoring over 2 goals a game over a long season is very unlikely.
Yeah.
But in our season last year, we had John Peterson, who was our leading scorer in September, and then Sam Bass kind of took over at the end of September through October, and then Adrian led us in November. So my talk with all 3 of them is, what if you all were scoring all 3 months? then what would it look like? Then how would teams really be able to stop us? And now you look at it and you say 70 goals. Well, if you guys all do what you're capable of for 3 full months as opposed to 1 month of the season, well, then we're talking 80, 90, 100 goals because you're all doing it. So it makes it easier for each of you. Because if Adrian's always a threat, Sam's going to score more. If John's always a threat, Adrian's going to score more. And the better each of them does consistently, the easier it will be for all of them.
I look at it too, just from a defensive perspective. If any team facing you, it ends up being, okay, pick your poison. Who you going to try to shade out of the game so that they don't score? Well, you still got 2 other guys who can ram it down your throat. And then how do you cover that? It just presents a whole other level of difficulty, right? If rather than just relying on one guy at any given point. All right, so I mentioned this before, and I like to sort of call out guys just because I think it's merited, right? Like you had incredible talent on your team. Kutsinzira, I mentioned Jack Rollins, who, again, one of my personal favorites, just the way he plays. Samuel Bass in the midfield, and then you had a Rookie of the Year. I'm not even going to pretend to pronounce
Miami.
Yeah, Miami. Okay. I appreciate you stepping in for that one because I'm like, yeah, no, just again, just an outstanding team. And all right, so with all this talent, you're going in against into the Final Four. You make it for the first time, and you draw Connecticut College, who in their own right is an outstanding team. Having watched them, I'm also a big fan. And actually, my first interview was with Coach Burke. First coaching interview that I've done was with Coach Burke, which was really interesting. What were your thoughts going into that game? You obviously have all this momentum. You have a huge win against Messiah, which that to me is like another threshold game. Like, man, if we can beat these guys, we can. There's no reason why we can't think we deserve to win the national championship. What were your thoughts going into that game? Against Con.
Well, them being the champions of the NESCAC, any team that comes out of the NESCAC having won that conference, they're a tough team. And they've had success in past years, and we had seen them in 2019. We're in the same Sweet 16 pod. So we know they're a good team. And we were really saying it was going to have to come down to our defensive discipline and then using our counterattack. Because we thought that they would stretch out a bit looking for goals. And we knew that counterattack is a very effective tool for us. So I think, we created some opportunities, and, it was a great game, a very close game. And, I thought when you look at, Michael hitting the upper 90 with the set piece, with Connor getting behind their defense and then passing it to the goalkeeper. Sam had 3 or 4 counterattacks that if he had just gotten rid of the ball or touched it 2 inches sooner, their dives to stop him wouldn't have been successful. So it was close. And, walking from that game, I look at, that's a strong team, and I give Ruben and his team all the credit in the world. And at the same point, soccer's about life lessons. So, even at the NCAA's own telecast, the broadcasters were maligning some of the calls from the referee, particularly the red card to Michael Kutsinzira.
Yeah.
The player from Connecticut College came up to Michael and said he didn't touch him or foul him. So he's sorry that he got called for a foul. But with my guys, I look at it and I say, bottle that fury, bottle the anger, take a sip every time you're working out and every time you're getting some training in, and make sure you understand that next time we have to control what we can control. We can't control the referee. So if we had scored 2 more goals, it wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah.
If we had blown a defensive assignment and given up a goal, it wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah.
So if we just execute better, and even if we have the same referee and the same calls, we just got to manage it to make sure that it doesn't impact the result of the game.
And it wasn't like you didn't have any opportunities, right? Like and that's the execution part. If you bury, I could think of 3, 4 that were there for the taking.
Exactly.
It's a different ball game, right?
Exactly.
What was what was your message at halftime? It was still 0-0. Is it 1-1?
It was 0-0.
0-0. Yeah. What was your message at halftime and how things were going at that point?
I thought like the first half was a very conservative half from both teams. I think there might have been a total of 7 shots between the two teams. And so that was the talk, is that's not our style, guys. I'm like, we're not a get a goal and bunker type of team.
Mm-hmm.
Where let's put pressure on them and get them exhausted type of team. So we wanted to switch the field more. We wanted to have more people looking to take people on 1v1 in the final third, and just a bit more hunger in our transition game and more quickness in our transition game. And I thought the guys did a good job of that in the second half. They really came out, and I think there were 8 fouls between 18 and 20 yards from goal against us in the second half.
Yeah.
So they were feeling pressured.
Yeah. So I mean, again, the only 2 games you lost were in OT. The one is against Randolph, and then this game. What did you tell them after the game? Again, nothing. I would, head held high, right?
Yeah, it's got to be something where just the season we had, and other things, like we had alums from 5 different decades show up at that game. Wow. And families, like our parents, every home game we had the entire season, they threw a tailgate because they were just so missing it from the previous year and excited. And just like when you look at the totality of the season, we spent most of the year the #1 ranked team in the country, and we were in places where the program hadn't been before. And when I look at the seniors, from when they came in and what they thought they would experience to what they have experienced now, they have to hold their head really high and be proud of what they've done. And we had 3 All-American players. How many teams have 3 All-Americans on the same team? And I know it's never happened before in the 80-year history of this program. Where I think before I got here, I actually don't think there were even 3 All-Americans in the 70 years previously. So there's a lot of really good things, and I think they just have to realize that, to win a national title, you need luck. Yeah. Any one of the 4 teams in that Final Four could have won it.
Easily.
All 4 were great teams, and but you need some luck, and unfortunately for us, it wasn't our time.
Yeah.
But that doesn't detract from just the great experience, the great season they'd had, what they'd done to really just raise the program up and into a place that they had been talking about and wanted to do, and they did it. So I was really proud of them, and just wanted to make sure that they realized that one moment doesn't take away from the success of 4 years and the success of 3.5 months.
Yeah.
It's a lot more than just that single moment.
I could have easily seen, I would have not batted an eyelash if the final was Washington and Lee and Chicago, right? Like, I just think it would have been, that to me would have been okay. That's, both teams are both capable, and just like you said, there's a luck element. And once you get to that spot, there is a execution, there's a little bit of luck, there's, who has a little bit more momentum or a little bit more juice in the to go after games. And I don't doubt you're going to be back there, right? Like, I just think you broke a threshold. Now I think it's, how do you carry it all the way through, right? Like, that's a big, and you have the talent. Like, I mean, I'm again, I just looking at your team and watching, like, I mean, you have some great talented ball players all over the field that I think they're probably chomping at the bit already. I would suspect, right? Like they want to get back at it and compete again and do all of that. So
Very true. Very true.
so I just this is also something I just started to think about, and I just want to touch upon your staff because we've talked about the players and the team and the program and what you're doing, and you were recognized as ODAC Coach of the Year, and I don't know what that All Virginia one was. You were Coach of the Year for the whole state of Virginia.
Yeah.
And you're All Region Staff of the Year. And maybe you could just comment on the guys who, on who you worked with about, because it wasn't just the players who got to the Final Four. It's also you and your staff. So maybe you could comment on that.
Right. With all those awards, I look at it as, I'm really appreciative to have John Freeman and Gordon Meeker and Garrett Erickson with me. But it really is a team award. I see any coaching award as, you can say whatever you want, but if the players don't listen, it doesn't really matter. So if you can't get them to listen, you're not going to get any awards.
Good luck with that. Right?
Yeah. So, we're proud of that and we're thankful for it. But it's great because we have, I use my whole staff. And what I mean by that is everyone's an active coach. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important for their happiness, but also for the success of the program is there's no one that I just use as a lackey. Mm-hmm. It's everybody's working with individuals so we can get as much direct coaching influence on players as possible. Mm-hmm. And those guys did a great job. And, Garrett was a player for us and transitioned to a student assistant coach this year and just brought an enthusiasm and a devotedness to it that was phenomenal. And Gordon's an alum from 20-something years ago who moved back to the area and wanted to be a part of the program and, was someone who just sort of was really positive and appreciative of the opportunity, but it also developed great relationships with the guys and could talk about the differences between when he played here and what they're experiencing. And so I think it gave good perspective to the guys about the opportunities that they were having.
Do you have any concerns for next year? I mean, that you can say publicly, like what you're thinking of your team and what you need to do and execute upon on?
No, I think with the guys we have returning and the players we have coming in, on paper we look really good.
Yeah.
So, but you're
in a tough spot, right? You got to manage all those egos. Now you know how Jose Mourinho feels, right?
Yeah. We have to look at it from the perspective of, I have the guys read books over the summer. And each class has a different book to read, and they have to give book reports and in play formation. No PowerPoints are allowed. So the book for juniors is Who Moved My Cheese?
Yeah.
So not a heavy read, not a big, I'm trying to teach you everything in the world. Yeah. It's what I call a one toilet sitting book. And you get a good message. And that's the concern you have after a great year is, again, young men are the biggest thing we have to control is egos and people starting to think that, oh yeah, we have the talent here. We're just going to be good.
Yeah.
Because it really does come down to us playing as a team and executing as a team that led to our success and will lead to our future success. Yeah. So making sure that everyone has that group mentality above their individual mentality.
What book do you have the freshmen reading?
The freshman, that one is John Wooden.
Oh yeah,
book.
John Wooden's book. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, must reads. Definitely both of them. I know. Yeah, both of them are. You're not choosing, War and Peace. That's a good thing. I'm sure they appreciate that.
I'll tell you, one of the most interesting things is the seniors don't read a book. They get to choose TED Talks to present to the team and to discuss why they thought they would help the team. Mm-hmm. And what they pick, that's cool.
Yeah.
Like we've had talks, and because we do this in preseason and every class presents, and we've had talks that have lasted an hour and a half where soccer isn't even mentioned,
Yeah.
but it's about us.
Yeah.
And it just gives them their voice and their ability to sort of own the team a little bit more in their final season.
It sounds like you have a buy-in of the team, and sort of culturally you have this way about making sure everyone owns a piece of whatever their spot is on the team, right? And make sure that they're accountable to the guys around them. And like I said, I mean, it's not, you have the talent, right? Like it's the talent's there, and now it's the buy-in. And I think that this sounds like this is sort of thing that you're doing to make sure that they are bought in and they do understand. And it's part of this ends up being a 4-year journey for some of these guys about becoming young men, right? And going out to the world. So, all right, I rambled like I was a parent there, which I am, but let's shift over to recruiting, if that's okay.
Sure.
Just I ask this because I it's a big deal in my mind. It might not be in others, but when you go recruiting, do you look for positions or do you look for players?
At the start of my job here, I looked for players. Now I'm looking for positions.
Yeah.
So when I needed to increase the depth and the overall talent level, that's when I just wanted the best players I could find and would figure it out. But now we need to improve specific areas of our team and have I call the game a puzzle. All different shapes and sizes and abilities and then traits need to be making one sort of full coherent picture that we all consider beautiful. And that's kind of the task now is, okay, maybe, we need a little bit more speed on this side, or we need a ball winner over here, or we need somebody who's just really a smart defender. And now we're looking for those specifics as we recruit.
Yeah. It's a good luxury, right? Like that's a good luxury to have. Hey, I got to ask an honest question, and you've been doing this for a number of years now. And I was corrected in saying that they're not deficiencies, or what they lack, but high school kids that are, making that jump to Division III soccer. I say the term lack, so I'm going to get in trouble by the one particular coach. But what are the things that you think they lack or are unprepared for the college game? And maybe it's specific to Washington and Lee, because I know academically you guys it's a strong school, so there's that component. But just overall, the recruits you've been bringing in.
What I tell recruits typically is that I wouldn't say college soccer is necessarily a more sophisticated level of soccer than what they're playing, but it's faster and more physical. So I think those are the two things that they really have to adjust to. The speed of play has to get faster, and they have to be prepared to be pushed a lot more and bullied a lot more and have people sort of using their strength. And when they're playing a 22-year-old and you're a 17, 18-year-old, well, you could be 30, 40 pounds in the minus in that competition. So that's something I think all players coming up have to adjust to. Is you might have had great success when you were playing people who were 125 pounds and 5'6", but now when you're playing someone who's 6'2", 190 pounds and faster than you, how are you going to adjust your game to that? And I think that's the biggest challenge everyone has coming up, is basically adjusting to those things.
Yeah, I know the physical part, right? And that was the clarification that I got. It was Coach Dunshee at Washington College who told me that. He's like, it's not that they lack, it's just that they don't have that experience at that level. And he said one of the biggest ones, forget the academic side, which is a whole other set of not unpreparedness, but that they're not expecting, but just the physical nature of the game is something that they're not accustomed to. To your point, right? Like people, people forget, a senior has had 4 years of the gym, just that alone, and some more physical development and playing those stretches that, I mean, they could, some of these guys are just jacked, and you're going, and you're high school seniors are twiggy by that, they might have seen the gym, but,
It reminds me, I had a player a few years ago who was very quick, and he was a left winger, and he had stolen the ball and gotten away. And then after about 15 yards of getting away, he kind of put it into third gear and wasn't going as fast. The guy he stole the ball from, he was 6'1", about 185, and muscular as can be. And he just came back, stole the ball, buried him legally, and the freshman got up a little bit woozily and wasn't really sure, and was like, okay. And his name was Lenny, and I'm like, Lenny, are you used to being the fastest guy on the field? Like, yeah. I'm like, well, were you using that right there? He's like, not at the end. Yeah. I'm like, well, I want to introduce you to Ben. Ben's faster than you. He's bigger than you, and he hates to lose the ball, and he will never stop chasing you. And then he's just like, okay, coach. I'm like, if you ever do this again, you're going to get hurt. Don't do it again.
Yeah, that's true. It's just, and I've had different conversations about that very thing. Like some of these kids are super talented in their own right, but they've lived in a little bit of a privileged spot. They could be the best guy on their team, and so they're never really pushed, or they're the fastest, and teams sort of place a heavy emphasis on them. And so they think they can do whatever they want to do, and then they come to college soccer, and then they don't realize it, but they're, if you have 30 guys on a roster, for all intents and purposes, they're number 30 on that roster spot, right? And it's a whole new ball game, and they got it. How they get accustomed to it is a big thing. But what's the best way for somebody to get your attention if they're interested in getting recruited or trying to get part of your recruiting process?
Well, I think it's great, like, for recruits to email and give their full information when they do email. So their academic background, their soccer background, if they can email a copy of their transcript so we can understand if they are an academic fit, because that's always first and primary here.
Yeah.
But also, if you have video, send a link to highlights, and then talk about what tournaments you're going to be going to and where we can see you. So if we have that full information, then I know it's someone who's got his stuff together. Yeah. And typically it's those people who have their stuff together that I know can get into the school. And people who don't have their stuff together don't. Yeah. So that kind of helps sort of siphon out the likelies already. But it gives us full information, and we can take a quick snapshot and really see, okay, is this someone who's we really think has this full picture, or is it someone who we think maybe he could develop into somebody if he does X, Y, and Z? But if we don't get that full information, if we don't get the academics, it's kind of a non-starter.
Yeah.
And then if we don't have an understanding of, their video or their level of play, we're going to have to ask that question too. So it's, if you want to put your best foot forward and really step on the stage quickest, it's make sure you have all that information and get it out, and make sure when you craft the email, you've done some research. Make sure you have the correct mascot, the correct coach's name, understanding a few things about the program, and everybody's website's pretty good. Just spend 15 minutes on the website. You can do a lot.
How many emails have you gotten where they said something like "Go Gophers" or something?
It's at least a few times a month.
That's fantastic. Well, last I'll ask you, and just so you know, I usually go to the website and I get whatever information that I think would be valuable. So obviously your website, any camp information, and I try to put it in the description down below. So if there's anything in particular that you want me to post there, I'll gladly do so. And let me just ask to wrap up. What I'm talking to coaches who, I don't want to say rely more, but place a much greater emphasis on their ID camps than they do on maybe tournaments. Where do you fall in that picture?
Here's kind of what I tell people. I'm like, some people, when we see them playing on their club team, they're playing the exact role we would have for them on our team, and they're doing a great job.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they convince us we're great, they'll be a great fit. Sometimes their club team might not play the style of play that we play.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at, say, a typical six or a defensive midfielder. And a lot of systems, defensive midfielder is told to sit in the hole and never go forward.
Yeah.
And they're encouraged to never give away the ball at any cost. So oftentimes 70% of their passes are negative. That won't get you on the field on my team. I don't want you sitting in the hole. I don't want you playing negative balls. I want you going forward. So there's certain things that being one example of many is, all right, when you come to a camp, we get to work with you and task you and tell you exactly what we want from you and see if you can adjust. And that's a very common one we faced with sixes, is they come in and they're asked to play something very different than what we're doing. But you also see it in outside midfielders and forwards. And so we're able to, if we've been somewhat impressed with someone, but we're wondering how they'll adjust to a different style of play, the camps can confirm that and allow us to get what we need. And that's kind of a tool for players if they haven't been overwhelmingly convincing through their tournament play. That's another way you can help yourself more. I don't think it's more important to go to camps than play tournaments, but I think it's a tool that people have to show their sincere interest and to boost their stock up if they're wanting to do so.
Yeah. I think that's everybody's sort of consensus. Like the ID camp, they get put in a situation that more resembles what they're going to experience at that particular college or university. And then it's also just an indication of interest, right? You're not going to go to a camp that you don't want to go to school at. And so. And
I would say, of the people who want to play Division III soccer, I bet you 60 to 70% play center midfield on either their club or high school team.
Yeah.
And that's not 60 to 70% of the positions that you play on the field of team.
It's very true.
So positional changes are common.
Yeah. Well, that's why I asked before, right? Like, do you go for position or do you go for player? Because I guess in a previous life, we looked at it as you bring in the player, and then usually your freshman year, it's about learning to where you think they're going to best fit on the field into that team, and can they, I'll just say, step up into that new position that you're trying to create. Obviously, there's cases where, this guy's the beast of a center back, he's staying as a center back. But so yeah, that's why I asked that, and just why I was curious as to that. So. Hey, look, Coach, thank you very much. This was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Really, this just helps me. Again, this is all about understanding for me and sort of getting a glimpse into what you guys do. So really do appreciate you taking the time.
I appreciate you taking the time, and thanks for asking, and hope the project continues to go well for you.